I'm an ergonomist here, and I guess I feel obliged now to tell everyone that I am a sufferer of a low back injury. I did something kind of stupid last October and went and hurt my back. Kind of embarrassing telling people considering what I do for a living. I know what I'm not to do, yet I do it. Right? It's practice what I say, not what I do. So I'm going to kind of go over the things today, what you should not do. So to start, wrong way. Okay. I'm going to quickly go over, give you a little bit idea of the scope of the problem, number of injuries, whatnot. Very quickly go over the structure, anatomy of your low back, muscles, bones, tendons, whatnot. Quickly go over a couple injuries and then really focus on 5 key prevention risk factor things that you should focus on. And once again, this is something that I could talk about for an entire day, and there's many books written on it, and I'm going to give you kind of a lot of information, but try to focus on what are the highest risk for low back type injuries. So WSIB reports people specifically with back pain 3.4%. Seems like a pretty low number, but when you look at all the claims and the number of injuries that actually affect the back, about 30%, a little bit higher. And then claims affecting the low back specifically, about 20%. That's a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of pain and suffering, and a lot of it is preventable. You look at the general population statistics, a little bit different from these, and many of you I'm sure can attest to low back pain. How many people in here have experienced any type of low back pain, injury, suffering? Maybe not quite 80%, but by the time that you have come to the end of your life, more than likely you're 80% chance that you will. For myself, I've been suffering since I was 16 or so, and most recently, last October, I have a bulging disc, posterior lateral left, with like sciatic pain down the leg and whatnot. So I can kind of relate. But at the same time, if anybody has any questions in the middle of this, please feel free to ask. So everyone knows you have a spine. So you have your cervical, which 7 discs at the top, thoracic, 12 in the middle, the lumbar, which is kind of where we're focusing today, the bottom, and then your sacrum and coccyx at the bottom. The lumbar, you'll notice that they're a lot bigger. This is generally where all force, weight, action goes through. It's where your center of gravity is, and it's designed to take the most weight, the most force. So everything that you do is directed through your lower back. And then in between the vertebrae are your intervertebral discs. These are like your shock absorbers. They're kind of like a fluid-like material. Show you a little bit better picture. This is obviously a schematic diagram, but on the outside is a thicker type material which attaches the vertebrae, the bones, to the bones, and then in the middle you have the fluid-like material that will actually absorb the weight, the force, and kind of redistribute itself based on posture. So it does squish around and move. An analogy I heard from the recent doctor I saw was that it's like a water balloon. So picture a flattened, like a water balloon that you're stepping on, and as you move back, then the water balloon will bulge forward, or if you move forward, it will bulge backwards. That's essentially not as dramatic as that, of course, but that's kind of essentially how it moves and works. Not really going to get into this at all, because as you can see, there are probably about 50 muscles on there, and that's just really covering the major ones. What this diagram does not show are all the paraspinal muscles, like your erector spinae and your multifidus, that attach to the little bony prominences on your spine. These are the ones that you can see on somebody's, like a bodybuilder's back. On the left-hand side, the ones, and then on the right-hand side are the ones that are below the ones that are on top. It doesn't really help you with much, just to give you an idea of the complexity of your back. And once again, this is just the first 2 layers of muscles. And then below all this, there's your spinal cord, and out of your spine, as the spinal cord travels down, the nerves come out. So this gives an example of your sciatic or S1 nerve that comes out from your low back, innervates the heels, the muscles and tendons and whatnot in your heels. The S2, the back of your legs. S3, just around your buttocks. Same with 4 and 5. So injuries in your low back you may not feel the pain in your low back, you could feel it in your legs. I mean, some people, you report that they get sciatica. That's essentially, well, it can be several things, may not be sciatica, but they get symptoms in their legs. Something that I had that bulging disc in my lower back, and I had this unbelievable pain from right here all the way down to my baby toe. Unbelievable pain, but that's not where the injury was at all. It was just because it was from where I'd actually hurt my back. Pretty crazy. I couldn't, even though I understood the anatomy and whatnot, I still couldn't grasp that it wasn't my low back, or that it was my low back. Kind of annoying, really. Don't hurt your back. Simple as that. Examples. This is picture on the left. This would be at the beginning stage of what a bulging disc would be. So this little the fluid type stuff on the inside, this little white thing is just the schematic of how it kind of progresses. So the fluid on the inside here is starting to press out on the annulus, and this essentially is resting, or can be resting, on the spinal cord. So as it progresses, gets worse, it will start to come out, and then eventually where it's fully sequestered, meaning that it's herniated. This is just a schematic. I'll show you a better picture of it. This is also a schematic, but this again is the fluid-like material inside, the annulus on the outside, and how it's ruptured and putting pressure on the nerve root right here. So this nerve may not be actually activated until it's somewhere in your leg. But it shows what a herniated disc is. Another thing is, you'll often hear somebody tell you that they have a herniated disc. It is probably the most common misdiagnosed injury there is for low backs, where it's something that's diagnosed. It can be diagnosed by a GP or a chiro or a physio, and you can't really tell it without diagnostics. Probably won't get too much more. This is an MRI diagram of a herniated disc. You can see the disc here, and it has sequestered right out into and applying pressure to the nerve root. You can see it right here. This is the side view, and this is a top view. It's kind of a cool diagram to actually see what physically happens. So these right here are your bones, and then in the middle are the intervertebral discs, whatever explodes. This is an X-ray, and it shows a very common thing also, degenerative disc disease. Generally a catch-all phrase to see this is a normal distance between vertebrae, so your disc is right there, and you can see that there essentially isn't a disc. It's pretty much bone. It could quite possibly be bone on bone. Looks like there's a little space. I don't know anything more than this is what they would call degenerative disc disease. And without further diagnostics like a CAT scan or MRI, you wouldn't be able to tell anything further other than degenerative disc. So, now that I've given you a little bit of a ton of information, focus on the 5 highest risk problems for causing an injury. So, posture, dealing with weights, keeping it close to your body, twisting with high torque, sitting, probably the worst thing that you can do, and to avoid lifting after prolonged flexion. These are the 5 things that lead to the worst types of injuries. So, posture. Most important thing you can do is keep your back straight with what you're doing, whether you're lifting or walking or carrying something, a yardstick. What I try to tell people is pretend that there's a yardstick along their back, and that they should keep the back of their head touching it and their buttocks touching it, so that when you lift, you can see how just by bending over slightly a little bit right there, it wouldn't be. So you try to keep your chin tucked in and to bend down and keep your back straight. I've learned to be very good at that. Here's an example of it where you'll see lots of people that bend over on your left, and that's how they try to pick things up. This won't necessarily blow your back out, obviously, because we've all done it. I mean, I've still done it without thinking. But on the right hand, what you're doing is you're increasing your risk for a type of injury. Whereas on the right is what you want to do. You can see that the back is perfectly straight. And that'll just ensure that you can lift things a little bit more safer, won't put as much stress on your back. The big difference is between, this is hip flexion. So there's, when you're talking about how a person can bend over, you either bend over at the hips or you bend your back. So the person on the right is obviously bending their back. So bend over and pick. And there's hip flexion as well. But if you can keep your back straight and just bend your hips, then you're not putting nearly as much stress on your lower back. I'll show you actually further examples of that. The other key is to avoid end range of motion. So getting to the absolute maximum like the person on the left, whether it be twisting all the way around or bending over all the way to pick something up with your legs straight. Those are the 3 key things to remember for posture. And then I like to throw this picture in because I don't know how she does that. It makes me cringe. To give you another idea of what happens to the disc, person bending over like the gentleman on the right, and what I was explaining about the water balloon, stepping on it, how it puts additional pressure, I guess in this case backwards, which is essentially what happened to me, versus somebody who keeps their back straight. You're keeping an even distribution of the pressure on the discs. Does that help a little bit more? Anybody have any questions yet? Okay, still early. Keep the weights close to the body. I didn't really know how to explain this one other than with math. So, and it's just a little like a free body type diagram to give you an idea. So this person has a 50-pound weight in their hands. On the diagram on the left, standing straight up. And the load is kept close to their body. It has it at 12 inches. And the weight of their upper body, which always has to be considered when you're talking about the forces for the lower back, is very close as well. It's 1 inch. So that's the weight of the upper body as distributed over the center of gravity. So this person doing more of a stooped posture versus bending at the hips and keeping the back straight. Now the numbers to look at here to highlight are the 590 inch-pounds, which pretty much translate into newtons or pounds if you want. You can see keeping the weight close to your body keeps this moment about your low back at its lowest number. Keeping the back straight, the second lowest, and then at the stoop posture. So one way to think about this is if you're going to carry like a 50-pound box and you have it right here, it'll be about 10 centimeters from your center of gravity. That will equate to about 500 pounds of force that's going through your low back, which sounds like a lot, but we can take a lot of weight. It's surprising on how much weight we can have as long as it's directly through the spine. But if you put that box that's 50 pounds at 50 centimeters, then you've jumped it to 2,500 pounds, which is getting to a point where your shoulders may not be able to take it, but you're holding that weight and the force that's actually going to go through your low back is now 2,500 pounds. It's a ridiculous amount. And we'd have a lot of people here would probably have a lot more trouble in sustaining that. So those are the types of things where an injury is more likely. And we all know this. Like if there's a box on the table that's maybe 30 centimeters away from us, more than likely we'll slide it along the table and then pick it up because we know that it's so much more difficult to pick it up when it's further away. Groceries, the same thing. You try to carry them. Like you have to carry them if they're heavy at your side. You don't carry them out here, right? So a lot of this is in our nature to do. It's just that this is more important for when you're dealing with work and how you design a job and that you have to pick up that 12-pound part from over there. This gives you an idea of what can actually be occurring to your body. So rather than putting that 12-pound weight out there, you can put it closer to your body. Okay, now this is a little bit more. See how I bent the knees? I've learned. This is more for higher action movements where somebody like an axe, like a fireman or a logger. The problem with twisting is if you can picture a bridge. One of the supports, and it has all the guy wires, and they support the post. All of your muscles, ligaments, tendon, they are supporting the supports, right? Sorry, I said that backwards. The post, it's holding up the bridge. As soon as you twist, you're taking away all the structure, the strength that's built within the structure of the guy wires. You're taking away all that stability. So what they found is that for actions with high twisting, so it would be like an axe throw, that there's a significantly increased risk of injury. And what they don't really understand is the smaller motions. So if for a work, a job that requires a person to stand still and just pick up even minor or small weights, they don't really understand the effects of that. They know that with the higher forces, it's very detrimental, but with the lower forces, it's not really fully understood. So just kind of putting this out there more than trying to describe it. And then kind of as a side note, when you are at home or at work and whatnot, if you have to pick something up from the side, it's so much better to turn your body and then keep the load close to your body rather than twisting your spine. It goes back to the first point of keeping your back as straight as possible. Now, sitting. Sitting, what it does, your hips rotate out and it flattens your lower back, where you want the curve in your low back, which is normal when you stand. So people that slouch, it always happens. People sit up in their seats. Relative to standing, which this graph is based on standing being 100%, sitting actually increases the pressure on your disc by 50%, which is a significant amount if you think about it, because you think that sitting is a lot easier to do than standing, but the fact of the matter is that it's actually better for your low back to be standing versus sitting. I feel that way. Sitting at work is probably the hardest thing that I can do. So just to show you a diagram of essentially what it does. Come on. This is in standing, and you can see the natural curve of your lower back. And it may look like we're talking about the balloon again, that with the pressure forward, but this is how your discs were designed, and they actually are even. So when you sit down, you straighten out your back completely, and you create that balloon-like thing with standing on it, where it'll be putting pressure backwards, for lack of a better term. The key for sitting is generally try not to sit for more than 30-40 minutes at once, kind of like you just did, especially in chairs like this. The other thing would be to make sure that you have proper lumbar support, whether it be in your car, at your desk, or on the couch. Sitting with a pillow on the couch with a pillow behind your back and sitting up versus slouching on the couch. I mean, it's stuff outside of work. It's things that you do in your personal time as well, and your back health. One more. Avoid lifting after prolonged flexion. Now this would be like sitting for a long period of time, say 2 or 3 hours, and then reaching over to pick up like a heavy box off the floor. What happens, your tissues, they don't have that good elastic properties. So what they will do is they tend to stay in a particular way. So the balloon, it doesn't go right back to normal. It'll actually stay a little bit. So now the stability built within your discs is kind of been compromised. So when you go to pick this thing up, what you're normally used to doing, you can't do because the structure isn't there like it's supposed to be. And they found that a lot of people actually hurt their back this way as well. And also the same point is to avoid lifting while sitting. A lot of people will pick up stuff while they're sitting on their chair. So a little acronym to remember: keep your back straight, avoid twisting, keep loads close to your body, and keep lifts smooth. Try not to jerk them. And that's that.